Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Stockbridge Library's online poetry series. Our theme this year is Sparks in the Dark, and we are pleased to welcome poet John Maxwell, who will be reading for us today. John will be in conversation with John Gillespie. John is the founder of this poetry series. He started the program back in 2020 when many of us were stuck in our homes because of the COVID pandemic. And John and I thought this program would be a few weeks, maybe a few months, and here we are in year 5, essentially. So John, thank you so much for bringing this program to all of us. John Gillespie and John Maxwell, thank you for joining us. I'll just say a few quick words about John, and then I will turn the program over. I really love this, that John began writing poetry for himself at the age of 12, and he continued to write poems throughout high school and college, about the struggles of adolescence and being a young adult and coming of age. And he put all of these into a manila folder that resurfaced much later in life. And he decided to start writing poetry again. And he, in December 2022, he published his first book of poetry after writing poems for 50 years. And that book is called Hammering Nails, and I hope he'll share some of the poems from that collection with us today. John Gillespie, John Maxwell, thank you both for joining us. I'll turn the program over to you.
Great. And Wendy, thanks again for hosting. I think we're at program 142. Kathy is coming up, I think, soon, right? In May or June. Yeah. Kathy, I think gets most programs attended. The nominees are best listening poet. Yeah. So John, let's start out with, I think every poet has a unique background. So it's not that you started writing at age 12. What kind of sparked you to kind of start again and then to publish your first book?
So for me, poetry has always been therapy. I write really to deal with things that were going on in life, typically struggles, and I would write when I would really be struggling with some big challenges. And so I got busy with my career and I went away from it. But then I came back, and after you've been in that rush of kind of building a career and doing business, I started to really deal with the challenges of raising my 2 sons, my wife and I. And I started to have these feelings that I wanted to express myself. And it was this need to really express all these things going on. And I came back to the pen and paper again, and I just started writing, and it felt good.
Nice. Yeah. Writing can be very therapeutic. So that's when, your reaction to igniting sparks in the dark. That's our theme for this year.
Yes. Sparks in the dark. Very, 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 very interesting when I think about it. First of all, I wanted to say, I want, before I get distracted, I want to thank you, John, for inviting me here. This is tremendous opportunity, a great forum. You've had so many terrific poets. I want to thank Wendy and the Stockbridge Library for hosting this. Thank you. I just feel blessed to be here. And so it's wonderful. But Sparks in the Dark was the theme that you had. And when I think about Sparks in the Dark, I think so many of us poets kind of, we don't write on the center of the stage. We write in the quiet, dark corners of our world. And so the Sparks in the Dark reminded me of, what is that spark of creativity? What is that spark of emotion that leads me to write? But there's also another connection. There is there is that, poetry can be a voice and give voice to voiceless, right? And those sparks in the dark are sparks to illuminate those conversations that, need to happen, and they're not happening. And so I saw both of those elements in this, which really excited me and intrigued me.
Great. So let me ask you this, because I don't know if we want to go back to, when you were 12, but maybe that'll work. Are there any like really, really early poems that you want to share with us today?
Um,
You don't have to. I don't want your.
No. There's one that I wrote when I was 12, right? And I wrote when I was 12, and it was about the struggles of being in middle school. And my spirit drifts down long white halls and backless gowns by sterile walls, where only faceless figures tread on tile floors of halls I dread. And that was the beginning of this poem about being in middle school and being, just open, vulnerable, growing up, judged. And that poem was me pouring into those words some of those feelings. And so that was helpful for me. Again, therapy. So yeah, by the way, that's in my book. And there's a little note in my book that I wrote.
I got the
There you
Hammering Nails is his book. You can also use it if you don't have a hammer and you have to.
Yeah. So good question though, John. Good question. Yeah, it's always been therapy for me. And so and many of my poems are about exactly what they seem to be, and many of them are not about what they seem to be, but they're about the subtext that was happening at the time.
So let me ask you this, as I'm always intrigued, because we have had, I think a bunch of poets to talk about, work-related issues that become a poem. Once again, if you don't have something ready, but just something, I didn't know if there was an event at work, a challenge, a success. Once again,
Oh yeah,
if it,
definitely. Well, so it's never about work per se, right?
yep, right,
It's always about how we as human beings deal with that when we come slamming up against the real world, and all of those all of our insecurities come to the surface. So not explicitly about work, but maybe I'll read some of my poem, The Edge.
yeah, fine, go.
Very good. So I'm going to read, hold on a second, The Edge. And I started my own business 22 years ago, but this is a thematic poem called The Edge. One day I realized that everything I learned when I left the comfort for the edge. At 13, the edge was the dance floor I could not cross. With all the eyes upon me, my confidence was lost, till pounding pulse and sweaty palms pushed me across the floor to talk to the freckled-faced, red-haired girl standing by the door. At 18, the edge was sitting on my bed one last time before I go, to leave behind the safety of the only place I'd ever known. Heavy bags with luggage tags carried everything I own, and yet they could not carry the feeling I was home. It was courage at the edge to walk out the front door and leave behind the company I spent a decade working for, the walk to the parking lot, an unfamiliar path, but the only way was forward. There was no way back. A momentary panic found me in the car, but I remembered all I am and how I'd come this far. It was loving at the edge to stay beside my mother's bed and hold her hands as bit by bit the cancer spread. I whispered to her words of love and stories of her life, of all she meant to all of us on better days. and better nights. And finally came the silence that told me it was time. I whispered to her one last prayer, kissed her hand, and said goodbye. Time and time and time again, I ventured to the edge, fighting off the voices of panic in my head. In the comfort of the middle, there's no chance for growth or gain, no need for bravery or heroes, no courage, no medals, no pain. All the things worth having are waiting at the edge, guarded by the demons of fears and monsters in your head. At the edge, you have a moment as you stare across the gap to bravely press on forward or timidly turn back. All along life's journey, you leave a lot of things behind, but at the edge, when all is said, is where your life's defined.
Very nice. Very nice.
So we all find our edge, right? Somewhere or another, we find ourselves staring at that.
Yeah, and we got the video from that dance when you were 13. So we'll play that. We'll play that in the second half.
I was a better
Yeah,
dancer
Amanda's going,
then,
yeah, I hope we have
actually.
that video. Yeah.
Right. That's great. So a lot of emotion there, and really a lot of reflection on the challenges that I've faced throughout life. So a lot of that. That's part of the darkness, the sparks in the dark, right?
Yeah.
I've got another poem that kind of leans into some contemporary topics.
Good. Go for it.
The longest poem I've written is something called The Poet's Dance. And so I'm going to read you the beginning of it, but then I'll read you probably the operative section here. This is the first part of The Poet's Dance, called The Poem. I was a prisoner of the blank page for days. Staring back at me, it gave no comfort or solace, no concession or quarter for my advancing age. My favorite pen seemed indifferent, even callous, to my hopeful urgings to dance with the page. The first appearance of the poem, after hours of staring hopeless into empty skies, was a shy child peering around the corner. Cautious and curious, with wonder she spies and whispers softly to me, "Shall we dance?" "But what shall we write about today?" I implored. The poem grinned at me with knowing glance. "We shall write about the topics we've written on before." In her beguiling way, she had begun to lead the dance. She whispered, "Hope, love, God, death, and war." I breathed the heavy sigh of knowing she was right. She, this impish rhyme, had the gift for knowing where I must be going, from darkness to the light, from my shadow to the path that she was showing, eternal themes, and knowing the poems that I must write. And so we began to dance, the page and the pen. At first, tentative notes, musings became replies. Then the slow waltz between us finally commenced. The poem watched with wonder from a seat nearby. "I can hear your thoughts," she whispered in silence. And so that's kind of the setup to the poem. And I've always wanted to do a poem with more than one voice in it. And maybe I'll even do one someday with 3 or 4 voices in it, almost a chorus. But the subject of Sparks in the Dark, I thought about especially on the topic of war, and this is section 5 in the poem. As I searched my voice to write about war, I wrote of my feelings from the depths of despair. My spirit was broken and my heart was torn. Words poured from simmering anger, bared as my hands clenched the pen, my feet clenched the floor. Old men perfected the art of killing in war, from slings and arrows to missiles and drones. Machines do the work that soldiers once bore, the battlefield now the hamlets and homes, launching their shells 20 miles or more. Soldiers solemnly march to senseless slaughter for the headlines, bylines, and campaign signs, because their mission was always just to be fodder for someone's ambitious career designs at the cost of our innocent sons and daughters. The poem, with tears in her eyes, finally raised her head. Teardrops fell to the paper as I watched the ink dissolve. Into a pool of anguish, my lonely spirit bled. The words ran together as my sadness covered all. I saw her face of sorrow. Nothing spoken, nothing said. And there's so many tragedies going on in the world right now. And when I see war, I think people have a right to defend themselves, but there's a war a lot of wars that are happening, and the casualties and fatalities are typically citizens who don't carry a gun. And I think that's a great tragedy. So,
I like about your poem, John, is that, the poem itself becomes a person kind of at the table. And you're writing the poem, but the poem takes on its own life. I really like that. That's kind of a neat image.
Good. So that's been a part of it. I struggle with, because often my poems have a dark edge to them, a little bit of darkness. And I wondered I don't know, I don't run to the paper to write poems when I'm happy and joyful. I typically am going out and celebrating with friends when I'm happy and joyful, but there's a lot of that in poetry in general, I think. So
So does that mean you're waiting kind of episodically for something? Is there an episode of something that kind of triggers your writing? So something has to be going on, and I'm just wondering what starts it.
There's a yes and. For a long time, I said, I don't write poems. Poems write themselves, and they merely use me to put them on paper. And that was really where I spent a lot of time waiting for the poem to happen. And that was fine, but it wasn't reliable. And then I developed a habit, which I got into and I got out of, where I would sit and write for 15 minutes every day. And I've got a part of my journal online, or on my computer. I call it rhyming practice, and I would just write line after line after line after line after line, and none of it would make sense. And then all of a sudden I'd write something and say, hey, wait, that could be something. And all of a sudden 2 or 3 lines stick together and I say, hey, that's something. And then I would work on it, and maybe those become a poem. Maybe they don't. So I'm inspired. Yeah. And sometimes it just happened. One poem came to me while I was lying in bed in the middle of the night. And it came to me pretty much whole. And I grabbed my phone and I just started tapping it out on my phone. And this one came to me whole.
Yeah.
Could I read that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's called The Miracle of Perfection. A microscopic flash of light ignites a chain reaction where day is night. The flutter starts a fateful flight across eons of nature's ancient rite. A moment the past and present merge in a timeless march, the conscious verge, as the miracle of life occurs. What appears here is pure perfection, not some random chemical collection, rather a divine direct expression of the spirit whose spark was the light that started the reaction where day is night. From this randomness, pure design, with details so carefully refined, it is impossible to find connection to theories about natural selection. We all started in the dark, but sprang to life as the product of the same spark. Into an empty space springs a soul filled with love and grace. And in the cradle where the baby lay, deserving of love, respect, hope, and praise, surrounded by the faintest light, in a humble manger on this night, a child is born into the world, and it is good. And that one came to me whole. I was in the middle of the night. I woke up, I started tapping it out on my phone. I got some more, I tapped it out. I try to go back to sleep. I can't go back to sleep. I tap more of it out. And I probably spent 30 minutes editing the next morning, and there it was. That's it. So I love, by the way, I love the creative process. I love when it just washes over me, right? And I have to pour it down on paper. That's just amazing. I love that. But other times it's a lot of work.
Yeah. So listen, we're kind of close to the top, a little bit before the top of the hour. So why don't we take our little mini break and have the people listening in, make some comments or ask some questions.
Love it.
Anybody? I know a lot of people are muted, so just unmute if you want to. Amanda and Pat, I've known for a long time. Extraordinary speakers. Do not let the poet off easy. This is your time to build. This is your time to, your 20 years of frustration to let it. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, John's prepared for this. John's like,
Come on, bring it on. I can take it. You can.
Yeah.
I can take a punch.
I had a comment. So your writing practice, when you said you just keep your pen moving and stuff, it really reminded me of Natalie Goldberg's free writing, which I did for a while, because you just keep your pen moving for a certain number of minutes, and it maybe it becomes a poem, maybe it doesn't, but it just is part of like keeping all the gears oiled and everything for the creative process. And so I just wanted to say that I enjoyed that and related to that, and yeah, that's what I want to say.
Amanda, that's wonderful, and it's a practice that when I started it, it felt like I was, okay, what am I doing here, right? And nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden, with no explanation whatsoever, it starts to happen. And so when I treat it as a habit, it really works. And so, Amira, I appreciate you joining us from Tuscany, Italy.
Yes.
So
thank you so much. Yes, I have something to share.
Go ahead.
Yes, I love your comment about writing your poetry when you're sad. It's very interesting, and I think many of us can relate to that. I do relate personally, as I'm originally Palestinian, some of you don't know. And poetry, for me, was a companion because I've been away from my country for a long time. And I've never published my poems. And yes, and I do agree. We do write poems when we are not in the best time of our lives. It's a kind of like auto-therapeutic method. Yes, I do agree.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The writing process is good. You must share with me more of your poems. I would like to see those. That would be great.
Yeah.
Other questions? Give me hard ones.
Well, I just have a comment to follow up with that. I used to get questioned as the literary magazine sponsor, why are all the poems in this high school literary magazine so dark? And I always had to say exactly what you said, that, people don't run to write when they're ecstatic about something. And I find that for myself as well. I think, certainly there are funny poems out there. Sometimes people do that, but I feel like more often the poems are the spark that we need when we're in the dark.
Yeah. Kathy, do you ever feel like your poems are this little capsule of emotion, feeling, and moment that you can, when you read them, you can come back to that moment?
Absolutely. I certainly do.
Me too. Other questions, comments?
Well, I'll add one more thing. When you talked about the poems that just kind of flood into your brain, even if you're asleep, I find sometimes that those poems that come so easy are the ones that people like the most, and the ones you spend so much time, really working at revising and editing and perfecting, are not always the ones that are appreciated the most. I don't know if you find that.
Yeah, the ones that come quickly come from the place of deep emotion.
Yeah.
And they come from the deep emotion that's the authenticity that people can feel when they read it. For me, poems are words, there's a sound, but it's really about a feeling. If I read a poem and I don't feel it, then I think we missed the mark. So wonderful. Other questions?
So,
Hey, John, yeah, Bill, go
John-
ahead. Bill, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I was going to ask John a question because you one of your poems in your book is How a Poem Arrives.
Yes.
And you talk about the poet's painful emptiness and staring at the empty page until the torrent starts to flow. But on the other hand, you know, what you said earlier was that there's a certain dark edge to your poems, maybe not illogical, because that's oftentimes what motivates people to
Right.
start writing is some event. And so, you know, thinking about the poem, How a Poem Arrives, made me wonder, do you wait until there's some dark, troubling, episodic event that occurs, and then that motivates you to start to write? Or are there times when you will literally just pull out the pen and the paper and stare at the empty page because for some reason you want to write poetry, but you weren't triggered by some episodic dark event? It's almost like a chicken and an egg question.
It is. The answer is yes and. Yes and. So yes, when it comes to me, it floods into me and I run to the paper and I start writing. Or really now, my dirty little secret is I tap out an email to myself on my cell phone and I send myself an email. And so we go, some other people. And I've got these I can search, I put poetry in the title line of the email and I can go back and find them all. And I've got probably 8 or 10 not quite done poems. Then on the other hand, Bill, when I really want to write something, I will sit and think, but if I can take myself back and visualize and feel and experience a moment when I was really struggling, and The Edge is a good example of that, right? Because I took myself back to all those moments. If I can feel the emotion, then I can take myself back there. And the emotion can be with me. But if there's no emotion, it doesn't work. Mary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you rely on rhyme a lot, and I'm wondering, what do you like about rhyme and how does that play in structuring your poems?
Great question. Great question. I really kind of cut my teeth on Robert Frost, right? Emily Dickinson, right? Whitman, Yeats, and there's a lot of rhyme and rhythm in their poems. And for me, that rhyme and rhythm, and by the way, those two go together, rhyme and rhythm go together. I have to feel the poem. And when I hear, as I call it, the music in the poem, it moves me. I have written some free verse, I really have. And not many of them really connect with me. It's a me thing, right? But when I hear the rhythm and the rhyme, it's the music and I feel it right in my body. And that's just me, but that's how I write. Great question.
Thank you.
So in Mary, go ahead, keep going.
No, I just said thank you for his response.
So in my, John Maxwell movie, you're in a dark room. There's a poem talking to you. Your phone is talking to you. Maybe even your pencil is talking to you. And I don't know if they're encouraging you or discouraging you, but they're basically saying, John, cut the shit and get back to work. Let's go.
Yeah. So I know where my priorities are. And if I've got a deadline, the poem's inside of me, I'm going to write down the poem.
Yeah.
Clear the decks. I gotta write down the poem because I've had a few cases where it was right there. I felt it was in me. And I said, I'm going to come back to that. And guess what? It's gone. You can't get back there, right? And so I scribble down anything I've got. If it's on my phone, it's my phone. If it's in my notebook, it's in my notebook. But I'll scribble it down and come back to it. And so I've become a bit of a pack rat. I've got a folder. I've got a folder on my computer for unfinished works, right? Got a lot of stuff in there. And so I'm going to come back to those. Absolutely. So that's how I deal with that. Other questions, comments?
I had one final one.
Yeah.
So you do sales training for a living? Kind of
Yeah, I
related?
do. Yeah, I do. I do sales training, executive coaching.
Yeah. Do you ever bring poetry into those conversations?
Interestingly, yes, a little bit, because um, a lot of what people do in sales and entrepreneurship, they have to confront themselves first. And when we can talk about fear, when we can talk about discomfort, when we can talk about being at the edge, that's real. And when we can talk about those things, sometimes poetry is useful. And we've just got to trust ourselves. We got to
Yeah.
trust ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Great. So let's return to our regular scheduled programming.
okay.
And you know, share some more of your work with us.
Wonderful. Here's another poem that came to me pretty quickly. And I didn't like the ending, and 2 years later I changed the last stanza. Does anybody else do that? Right? Yeah, okay, good. All right. So the poem's never done. Wonderful. This one's called Hourglass. And I've been studying Buddhism and I'm very fascinated by it, but it's really about the process of being present. And so this one's called Hourglass. I live for just a moment within the hourglass. My future is above me, below me is my past. The fine grains of sand slipping through the gap for just a fleeting moment, neither future nor the past. Within the bowl above me, grains of fate I must accept. Within the glass below me, promises broken, promises kept. But the time is just illusion that lives within the space between the hopes I harbor and the truth that I must face. While I dream about my future or dwell upon my past, my present slips away from me as grains fall through the glass. Yet as I focus in the moment, the grains just seem to stop, and I take the time to savor the only time I've really got. When I peer into the sliver between the future and the past, I find a vast expanse of time within the glass. A sudden hush of silence falls upon my soul, quieting the chaos of voices I could not control. Clarity arrives for me as I choose to stand in the peacefulness of being simply that I am. The hourglass can seem to be some master's master plan to give us pause to ponder our precious grains of sand. And that's a little bit of my tribute to being present. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that whole idea of being present, there's a lot of my poetry that's really about time. Time is kind of a big theme. I've got one here called 5 Minutes. And I think you figured out from my poem, The Edge, that I spent time with my mother as she was passing. And I spent the last 5 days of her life living with her in the hospital room. And that was an unbelievably powerful experience. And I wrote this poem while I was there, called 5 Minutes. If all you had was everything and everything to give, how would you spend your bounty with 5 minutes left to live? If all the friends you ever knew were here for you to see, how would you share your loving with 5 minutes left to be? If all the time you ever had was running through the glass, how would you spend that moment before your moment passed? With every single sunset your days are flying past, have you paused to ponder which 5 minutes are your last? The moment that you realize your life is here and now, you'll not wonder how to honor it, you'll understand just how. You'll give away the only thing you ever have to give: warmth, friendship, heartfelt love. One life you have to live.
Very nice.
And you know, I was kind of thrust into that conversation with myself because I was with my mother, and it was her time, right? It was her time, and that's pretty meaningful to me. And I wake up every single day because of that, and I'm astounded by the absolute miracle that I even exist. And so that's a great blessing, and so that's stayed with me. Here's another one that I wrote, and forgive me, but I wrote a lot of this one, and I did come back and revise it, but it was actually the last poem to go in my book. And I wrote this one. I'll let you figure out where I wrote it, okay? For just a moment when I wake, there is this quiet, sacred space. Within the blanket's soft embrace, I feel protected, warm, and safe. No angry voices scolding me with hurtful words dismissively. No stares of people judging me with eyes that look but cannot see. I am perfect and undiminished as a work of art yet unfinished, a perfect soul still unblemished, knowing I am loved and cherished. Within this solitude, I can be what those around me cannot see, my soul and self in unity of perfect oneness. I am me. And I always treasure that first 5 minutes after I wake up in the morning. As just that's just me, right? Nothing out there. It's just me, and that's a beautiful place to be. I connect with that a lot. I typically get up at 5:30 in the morning. So,
Hey, John, I thought you would have already written your divine intervention poem about Michigan football. You know,
I
capturing the
actually
national
have.
championship.
I have written poems about Michigan football, Go Blue, right? But I will not be sharing those today. But those are going to be in. They're actually, one of those is in the current edition, but there's a longer version, so that'll come. Go Blue.
Yeah.
Here's a poem. Does anybody here like thunderstorms? Okay.
Sure.
I like thunderstorms too. And I remember growing up as a young boy, we had a house on a hill, and I could see the thunderstorms coming from far away. And I was both, as a young boy, I was both frightened and fascinated by them. And I wrote this recently, but I took myself back to that time when I was a young boy. And so this is called These Storms That Come. A storm is coming. I feel it deep within my bones as whispers in the winds are humming, distant rumbles deep and low. White lace curtains barely flutter as breezes through an open window carry with them scents of summer, only hints of what is yet to come. Far away in the western sky, rolling thunderheads filled with light drop sheets of rain from clouds on high on distant fields of wheat and rye. The calm before the storm arrives with sudden hush and fading light. Frogs sing, bees to the hive, the cows lay down and birds hide. The winds rise, trees begin to bend and sway in a slow, gentle dance as oak leaves clatter and fly against the gusting storm steady advance. The storm begins with pea-sized hail pelting the old shed by the street, whose corrugated rooftop wails a loud and steady calypso beat. Finally comes the rain. Light patters of drops begin tapping out nature's gentle rhythms to strains of nearby bolts of lightning cracking. The wind sounds like a runaway train as it roars through the trees. It wails. Broken limbs fly through the air. Leaves swirl and dance, tossed by the gales. The rooftop rumbles with heavy rain, wave upon wave like cymbals crashing, rattle windows hit by spray, gutters full and downspouts splashing. The fury of this raging storm raining down upon my little house is battering my fragile soul, calling all my fears and doubts. Then in just a moment it fades. The western winds and rain subside. As clouds part behind the gray, the first rays of sunlight shine. At the open door, my eyes are wide to sights of water droplets falling from old trees and fence post wires as songbirds resume their calling. I step outside my little house to the blue skies and warming sun to seek some peace within my soul as I endure these storms that come.
Nice. Very nice.
There's a thank you. There's a little bit, if you squint closely, you'll see there's a little bit of metaphor in there, because sometimes these storms that come are not weather. So when I was getting ready to publish my book, one of the things I realized is that all my poems are about me. Maybe I think that's true of all of us poets, right? All of our poems are, I mean, if it didn't happen to you, you can't write a poem about it, right? Some way or another. And so I decided, because I felt so exposed emotionally, I decided to write a disclaimer. And so this is my get out of jail free card for my book of poetry. And it's called Disclaimer. Each of these is a story about a point in time. Every story is not the truth, but the truth of every story rhymes. Many rhymes were written long ago and far away, so it's difficult to know the story's time or place or day. The characters resemble characters of a version of the past. I am just the writer and the characters are just the cast. The one truth to know is the truth that I was there. It was me amidst the wreckage of revelation and despair. The clue for you to take from this puzzling pile of words is the puzzle is not the point is not the words. Leave the mystery to the mystics and simply sing along. Let the meaning of the meanings be the mystery of the song. Enjoy, and I will not be coy.
And it's actually a disclaimer in the book. Yeah, Kathy, he's setting up new ground for poets. Not only, Amanda, do you have to write, but you have to write your disclaimer and then your own publicity. Yeah, you have to write 7 different types of things before you can really publish.
By the way, and for those of you that have published a book, you know this, but it's so hard to take your work and put it into a poem. It was way more work than I thought it was going to be, right? I mean, I've just written them all. I'll just send the manuscript off and it's done. No. There's endless details to do that. But it's worth the effort. It's very much worth the effort.
So John, what are you working on now? I mean, I know you have a new grandson, so there's a grandson poem that may have hatched, or
yes. There is a brand new grandson, Henry. And so I'm writing a poem, and it's not done yet, but I'm writing a poem, and it's about Henry, but it's from the point of view of Henry. And so that presents a certain challenge. because he doesn't talk, right? He doesn't talk, and so it's really hard for me to write a poem about Henry, but I'm working on that. And so somehow he is experiencing the world. Somehow he is experiencing the world, and I'm trying to lean into those feelings. So that's a work in process. But I have lots of poems that are not done. I have lots of poems that are not done, and some of them are long. Has anybody had the experience of you start writing a poem and you're not quite sure where it's going and it just keeps going? Yeah, I've got a couple of those, and I'm a little bit lost. So I don't know how to finish them. I had one poem I wrote, and and um, and the poem is it took me 10 years to write it, because I started writing the poem, and then after I'd written the poem, I got about halfway, a third the way into the poem, and I couldn't finish it, and I was stuck, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I came back to it over and over again, and finally I had to do the hardest thing ever, and it was the only way I could finish the poem. I had to rip out 2 stanzas I'd already written and I loved. But after I ripped out the 2 stanzas that I loved, then I could finish the poem. Has anybody else had to rip out stanzas that you'd written? It feels like I'm cutting off a finger or something, right? It was really painful, but it broke loose the creative process. So it's actually the title poem of the book, called Hammering Nails. If I could read that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, do it.
The carpenter started just before dawn. His canvas this morning, a fresh spring lawn. It was bursting with promise and covered with dew. The carpenter started building anew. He started the project without any plans, a blank sheet of paper, the print in his hands. He noted the time and the calendar date, but worried the morrow was starting too late. As the sun was breaking the crest of the hill, the meadow glistened and the air was still. The swallows circled in the morning vistas. The air was heavy, cool, and crisp. He laid a foundation of heavy stone that he pulled from the field where he'd built his home. The foundation he built made a perfect square so that neither side was favored there. He cut some trees from the wood by the lake, shaving each timber till perfectly straight. Then he lifted those timbers one by one into place until the framing was done. He secured each timber by hammering nails, paying careful attention to the smallest details. The shingles layered to keep out the rain, 4 windows cut from the clapboard frame. He paused for a moment, wiping his brow to survey his work as time would allow. It was high and wide with plenty of space to serve as a suitable gathering place. The carpenter nervously looked to the sky. The midday sun was hot and high. Knowing his work was far from complete, he continued to hammer in midday heat. He carefully crafted a table and chairs for family dinners and Sunday prayers, a place for sharing holiday feasts, a place for sharing with those who have least. He built in the kitchen a hearth of stone for an open fire to heat the home, and an oven to bake the leavened bread to ensure that family and guests are fed. He built a window seat on the eastern side. The solid oak bench was deep and wide to comfortably seat his visiting guests in their workday clothes or Sunday best. He built a 4-post bed of knotty pine beneath the window on the western side, facing the hills and the setting sun, to appreciate the day when the day is done. Fitting each piece of his simple design with his craftsman hands and careful eyes, securing each piece by hammering nails to ensure that none of the fittings will fail. The carpenter finally laid down his hammer as there were no more nails to hammer. It was time to rest. He laid down his head on the simple and solid knotty pine bed. The lengthening afternoon shadows dissolved. The darkness grew colder as light rain falls. As twilight faded, the air was still, and darkness arrived with the evening chill. When the sun arrived later, waking to dawn, the house was standing tall and strong. The dew was heavy on the fresh spring lawn. The morning was here, but the carpenter gone. As the years go by, the stories retold of the humble carpenter who built this home with hands and heart and sweat and blood to be a sanctuary for those he loved. Knowing the truth of the carpenter's tale, remember each day you're hammering nails and building a house for followers who are in search of a carpenter just like you. So that was the last one, and it felt like, aren't we all carpenters here? Aren't we all hammering nails and telling our stories? And we leave those stories for other people. So that one means something to me.
Yeah, I think with the carpenter, I felt like there was some mystical, like the carpenter ran off into the night, into the woods or something, or they never found the carpenter. I don't know. I feel like there's like a poem 2.0 with this.
Remember my disclaimer, right?
Yeah.
There's a story inside the story. So
Yeah.
I'll let the reader find it, right? I'll let the
Yeah,
reader find it.
yeah.
I know we're getting close to the end of the hour, but there's one poem I must read.
Yeah, read one poem, then we're going to do a little Q&A again if people
Very good,
want to
very
do
good. This one I wrote for my wife, Jackie, on our 35th anniversary. I recall when you were magic to my eyes, too small to hold the sight, you standing by the window like an angel in the morning light. I remember Friday evenings cooking pasta on the stove with scents of buttered garlic bread and glasses of Merlot. I remember sunny Saturdays with concerts in the park, holding hands, we sang with bands who played for hours after dark. I remember Sunday mornings when the bedding was so warm, it kept us in for hours while we waited out a summer storm. Holidays, vacation stays, and spending time with friends, snowball fights and board game nights, we did it time and time again. We also had some darker days when everything seemed hard. We fought about the little things that other times we disregard. We struggled forward through it as we'd done so many times. The battle scars were quickly healed. You forgot yours. I forgot mine. Before we knew what happened, the years were flying past. Our friends grew older. Winters colder. My hair took on a silver cast. This morning, eating breakfast, I saw you standing in the light. By the window, still the angel I met one summer night. I marveled at your music as you hummed a simple tune, slowly dancing while you're standing in the kitchen drying spoons. I still can see your magic after oh so many years, through the struggles of the journey, the laughter and the tears. It was not about the good times or the struggles in the end. It was all about the gift to share this journey with my friend.
Nice, very nice. John, what's the name of that one?
Magic to Me. So that's it. Questions anywhere? John, I can't tell you. All the writers on this call know what a precious gift it is to be here and just to share our blessings with other people. So thank you, John. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
That's good. No, listen, we have a very nice poetry conversation. That's what it is. So for Alan, Jason, Brendan, and Colleen, we have a little Q&A with the poet. You can ask a question, make a comment. My humor part is don't let the poet off easy. This is your time to make John sweat a little bit. It doesn't look like he's sweating right now. So anybody have a question or comment? Well, I'll say one thing. I think some of your poems are I feel like I've known you for a long time now. And I think we've had maybe 2 phone conversations that have, lasted 10 minutes. But I feel like I have, just an insight to a lot of parts of your life. And that's very nice.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Tremendous gift. And if anybody wants to pick up my book, see, here's the plug, right? Hammering Nails on Amazon. And there's 50 poems in there. And I'm working on the 2nd edition. I'm not going to write a separate book of poems. I'm just going to have an extended edition of the first book to have them all in there. So I'm working on that. Give me a year or 2 on that. It takes forever.
Oh, Wendy, you'll like this one. I'm on the Brunswick, Maine Library Board, and my board mentor, because you paired up with someone, was talking about some things we needed to do, and we needed to be hammering nails.
Nice.
So I got
Perfect.
John's book and delivered it to this woman's house. And
That's
she
great.
was away. She's a doctor. She was away on some trip or something. And she came back, John, she was so excited, not just with the delivery, but hey, there's a poetry book called Hammering Nails.
Nice.
Great.
Nice.
Perfect. John, thank you so much for joining us. John Gillespie, as always, thank you for bringing this hour to us. See everyone next week.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Next
much.
week
I
is
appreciate all of